Much, Michelle. Really appreciate that. So I just want to welcome everyone and kind of set the stage for what we'll be talking about. Really appreciate everyone joining us for this event. The three of us thought it would be cool to have a conversation about how our recent books help shine a light on important issues in our society and how writers and editors can use short stories as a vehicle for raising awareness and affecting change. Our recent anthologies speak to three issues that we'll be discussing tonight. The need for more LGBTQ inclusion, specifically writers to be included in crime magazines and anthologies, climate change and the consequences thereof, and voter suppression. So, hi, John and Misty.
Hey,
Good to
Curtis.
see you both. So we've been talking about a lot of these things behind the scenes. So it's great to kind of get into the public and banter about these things. First, we titled this talk "Crime Fiction That Matters." So I kind of wanted to each of us to just kind of express what we think that means when we hear those words. Misty, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So my very first thought was, oh no, the people who write cozies are going to think I'm pulling attitude. Oh no. Um, so I want to say, first of all stories matter, all the voices. But when I see this phrase, I think about writers who are trying to tackle things that scare off traditional publishers, whether it's because we're trying to talk about voter suppression or people who aren't straight white men or whatever. And that all these stories that some publishers are afraid of are important for everyone to read, for everyone to, because when you see one person lifted up, you see everybody lifted up. And that's what it matters is what matters is that we get better.
Um, I think, when I hear it, I agree. I think all stories matter. I think storytelling matters. With that being said, I think that there are stories which sort of confirm the way we see the world and reinforce attitudes and perspectives we already have. And then there are stories that challenge those perspectives. And I think that we need, for comfort, sometimes we need the stories that can, reinforce the way we see the world, and perhaps that's fine. But I think to be healthy people, to be inquisitive, we need stories that challenge the way we see the world. So sometimes that's what we do. Not even sometimes intentionally. We just want, as a gay man, for instance, I want, people to read my stories and feel like it's universal. It's not just, I don't write just for other queer people, but I think that, sometimes that's, I think, kind of what maybe embedded or I thought a little bit about that term. Sometimes mattering means, attempting to persuade or change or challenge perspective.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think when we look at crime fiction in the past, it's done a great job of holding up a mirror to society and feeding us some hard truths and examining a lot of our societal ills, misogyny, racism, bigotry, all these
Yeah.
things. And so when we set out to examine one of those things, I think automatically it sort of, I hate to use this word, but kind of elevates the fiction. It puts an emphasis on it, right? It's more than just about a detective solving a mystery or, you know, somebody committing a crime and getting away with it. So, when we're talking about these things, why does, and this is kind of a presumptuous question, but why does storytelling, why is it a great vehicle for shining a light on these social issues?
I mean, particularly crime storytelling, like sort of to echo a little bit what you're saying, we're always dealing with moral questions. And I think some of I mean, but certainly in all of our, anthologies, and I guess we're particularly talking about the short story form here,
Right.
like it's a chance to sort of, um, I guess, think about moral questions in a way that intersects with political questions.
Mm.
I don't think we live in this world where we get to sort of say morals are over here and politics are over here.
Right.
I mean, and
Especially right now,
ethnicity's
right?
over here, and
Yeah.
it's all wrapped up together in this complex and times maddening way. And so crime stories, because they're always dealing with a crime of some sort, often, a murder or something, particularly where there's a high stakes crime involved, can really bring up these important social questions. And, it's sometimes they challenge and engage and challenge in different ways.
I really fell in love with the early in the cycle film noir genre, so like post-war to
Me
49 or
too, me
so.
too. Yeah.
And one of the reasons was because it was so good at exploring the gap between who we say we are to ourselves and
Mm.
each other and who we really are. And
Yeah.
nothing exposes that gap like a crime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Curtis?
Yeah, Curtis, what you started this conversation.
What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think all art is good at this, right? But I think storytelling is in our DNA. We were meant to share stories, and a large part of that is passing along empathy, right?
Yeah.
And helping the reader to gain an understanding about a certain type of person or people that they aren't aware of to begin with, and to gain empathy from that. And so I think storytelling and especially short fiction is really great at that, because you have to get in, you have to get out, you have to be economical, you have to be to the point. And I just think that's fertile ground for doing that.
I agree. And maybe this is kind of a question, to all of you that I have. It's like you have this sense of, that I agree. I mean, I teach this. So I'm always like, the importance of storytelling, why we must have it, why we must teach it, why we must celebrate the humanities, et cetera, et cetera. This is the professor and me coming out, is because, like, it's a way of increasing empathy and understanding. I think people get that confused, and I wonder how you think about this with agreeing. you
Hmm.
know? And where do you fall on that? Do you feel like someone is there a place in a story where someone could empathize but not necessarily agree, or let's put it this way, like maybe it's not so much about them agreeing or disagreeing, but it's about something else. What do you think?
I think it is. I think there is a difference. Uh, I think that you don't necessarily have to agree to come to an understanding of that person's point of view.
Yeah.
But if it's something as universal as, you know, a gay person wanting to be loved and accepted, like that shouldn't be something that you come to an understanding, you understand that point of view and then disagree with. Like that's just
Right.
antithetical to me. Like, so I think there is a spectrum there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because like the I kind of feel like stories are a way in. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, you can understand how someone would just want to be accepted for loving who they love, or, being who they are, or, a number of things, or feeling like we want to save the world because the environment is important,
Right.
like the understandable things that are basic human things. And then, then they kind of start running into the things they disagree with, but ultimately they have to admit the common, like, human part of it. And I
Yeah.
think storytelling can do that. I guess I don't know, I'm making a roundabout argument for the why it's important, but and why people should read things that they don't necessarily think they're going to agree with.
Absolutely.
I can't remember which stories, but I remember the experience of reading a story that really made me angry, and
Yeah,
it was
interesting.
because it was saying something was true about the world that I either didn't want to be true
Right.
or didn't believe was true. But it was really still important for me to read that
Yeah.
story because then I had to think about, oh, maybe I have a funny idea in my head that needs fixing.
At least you have to think about it, right? I guess that's the
Yeah.
point. It's like you have to think about it. I think I just struggle so much these days is people not thinking about things.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
It's
these
like,
days we have all this noise telling us what to think for someone else's particular purpose. It can be hard
yes,
to even know what you know and what you believe anymore.
exactly. I totally agree with you. Yeah.
So, Misty, earlier you said you didn't want to disparage cozies. So, in that theme, we
Yeah,
all
don't
love
disparage Ghost.
yeah, we all love entertaining fiction, right? So what is the appeal for a reader to pick up one of our anthologies that are admittedly have weightier subject matter and weightier topics?
Yeah, that is such a great question. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about one of the stories that came in for volume two or three was this really violent story set in a prison. And I'm like, oh, is anybody going to want to read this? And I'm like, yeah, I think they will because the character in it, we wanted that character to succeed in this impossible situation. And if this guy could, trick the guards, even in the weird way he does in the story, that's inspiration for me to stand up for my rights, for example. So I think people might be looking for inspiration. I'm sure some are looking for catharsis or and there are I'm sure each of your anthologies also has one or two stories that are just kind of funny or kind of
Yeah,
light.
but
Yeah, sure.
I think I'm curious, like, yeah, where humor, since we brought up cozy, and I know a lot of my favorite cozy writers, or I mean, they sort of like to think of it as like, you know, it's really playing with humor, and I think humor is incredibly hard to do, and a lot of them also are playing with big ideas, but with a light touch, which is also really hard to do,
Very hard to
and
do,
and,
yeah.
and I think that. You know, for there's a lot of darkness in my anthology that Salem West and I edited, and it's understandable. These aren't happy times for queer people, particularly our trans members of our queer family. But uh, there's still a lot of levity, kind of coursing through it. So yeah, it
You have a
wasn't just
lot of dark humor too, like
yeah, my
some
favorite.
gallows humor, which is catharsis can be cathartic for people too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's my kind of humor. I'm a dark humor guy.
Do you all think that we have a responsibility as storytellers to tackle some of these tougher social issues in our work?
I
Misty?
think uh sorry, John. I think we have a responsibility to tell the stories we're a little bit afraid to tell, and they might be social justice or they might be relationship or they might just be or climate or anything. But I think we should not just write to comfort or amuse ourselves alone. Those things are important, but not alone. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it just comes down to honesty. Are you being honest in your storytelling? You know, are you telling, it doesn't even have to be you getting on the soapbox and saying, this is the social issue I want to talk about. It can just
Yeah.
be, this
It's
is the
usually
way that the world is, and I'm going to show you that world, whether it's enjoyable or it's tough to take. And I think that's the responsibility that we should have as writers is to be honest.
Yeah, and I think often getting a soapbox is a terrible way to approach a
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're probably it's going to be a little DOA if you're just like, this is the thesis of my story, and I want to prove a point. I think
Yeah, these
sometimes
aren't essays.
yeah, and then you should be writing an essay, which is
Right.
perfectly great. I mean, that's exactly what you should be doing in an essay. But for a story, you're really after something else, which is to, try to replicate an experience and hopefully convince a reader to go along with that experience and raise questions in their minds as you're producing that experience for them. And so I think that could be very very powerful because it doesn't sort of say this is the thing you should get from this. It's sort of offering a circumstance which raises questions which then makes the reader think about what they would do or how they would feel um and so I do agree that we have as writers a responsibility to ask those questions. I know that maybe is not a popular sentiment with everyone. I definitely think that a lot of folks out there are like, look at entertainment's enough. And I think the entertainment is has its value. I think if we're just entertaining, that's not enough. In other words, and I think that's true for consumption as well, which is I think more about than anything with students and that kind of thing. Is that while I think having you know uh, you know a Big Mac kind of experience, which is just about pure pleasure, is great. If you had a Big Mac for every single meal, you're probably going to die young, you know?
Yeah,
So we need to make sure that we're having not a Big Mac every meal.
right.
So that, pleasure is great, but only pleasure or sort of that head in the sand stuff, which I fear now more than ever is happening. Like
Hmm.
we're gonna go in some other world. We're not going to engage with reality. We're going to stick our heads in the sand. It's all going to be, and this is not knocking fantasy fiction because I think there's a lot of amazing fantasy fiction out there. But you
Oh,
can
yeah.
kind of go, you can put your head in the sand, and I do think we need to engage, whether it's through a fantasy story or an our genre, a crime story. Some important things that we're dealing with these days. I do feel like there's a responsibility there. I guess I agree. Obviously, I wouldn't edit an anthology of queer crime fiction that was motivated by by a sort of call to action if I didn't feel that. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a little bit of a softball question for us, but just if anyone's wondering out there, yeah, I had that conversation with a lot of authors at this past BoucherCon. It's just, we're living in these fraught, tumultuous times, and we're having our friends and neighbors kidnapped off the streets. Gay rights, women rights are being trampled on. Voter suppression's at an all-time high. Uh, the president's calling climate change the biggest hoax ever. Like, at a certain point, we have to point to this stuff and say, this is bullshit, and call it for what it is.
yeah, you do.
Yeah.
You do. You have to call it out. We just have to. I mean, um, because it's like, I mean, do we like this idea? I mean, I'm not necessarily advocating for one, absolute reality, but there's something kind of a reality a lot of us can agree on. And I treasure that thing that, most of us, some things that we can all of us agree on. Um, and if we see those in jeopardy, I think we need to call out the people who are putting them in jeopardy. And so yeah, I mean, I think I mean, you have to call out, anything that's infringing on human rights, um, and anything that is, corrupting our idea of what our country should be democratically. You have to call those things out. That's once again sort of what a writer has to do,
Yeah.
I think. through a story, but not, I mean, you can write an essay too,
Sure.
but I guess we're talking stories here. So
I wrote a really pedantic short story and I can't sell it anywhere, so I know it doesn't work.
see, you can't do it.
Yeah,
You just need
maybe
to turn it into an
that's
essay.
right. Yeah.
That's right.
That's what I kind of like, why I kind of like my Substack. And, if I'm really feeling strong, I usually am just talking about craft stuff on there or whatnot. But like sometimes I do like feel like sharing something a little more like, this is what I'm trying to say. That's a place to do it, or find a place to publish your article or something. But um, yeah, I mean, when storytelling comes by, you have to put maybe you kind of have the issues in mind you want to explore, but it's an exploration. It's not a sort of um, like here's the moral to the story.
Yeah.
Hey, Misty, when we were talking, just the three of us back and forth, you brought up a really interesting idea, this counter premise idea. Do you want to
Yeah.
explain to people what that is and kind of pose that question to us?
Oh, yeah. Hopefully I remember it right. But so there's this theory of story structure that says that a story uh, is an exercise in proving that you're saying something is true about the world, and the story proves it, especially the ending. And so all my stories, I assumed were going to be proving that voter suppression is bad and not voter suppression is good. But I did get a couple stories that came over the transom uh, where the story ended up the people that you identify with succeed by suppressing someone else's vote. Like,
Mhm.
uh, and one of them, uh, if it had been better written, I would have had to really challenge myself and say, "Oh, should I publish that story?"
Mhm.
It wasn't well enough written. And then there was another one that just sort of accidentally proved that voter suppression was good. So
Oh.
I
Whoops.
asked that author, could he please just tweak the ending, please, please? And he very graciously said yes. So,
I
but
think,
yeah, so that idea that we're proving things are true, even with a fictional, lie,
yeah, that's
is the
interesting.
fun part of fiction to me.
Yeah. I didn't have that issue with On Fire and Underwater. I think it was just such although yours was very direct, voter suppression is not good, climate change is not good. But I don't think we received any stories that argued that climate change wasn't real. Where I saw this within the stories, and I thought it was handled very honestly and kind of what we have seen over the years is a certain character or group of characters didn't realize climate change was as bad as it was until it affected them. And that happens a lot in life, right? With social issues is,
Right.
you know, we don't realize how bad something is until it affects us or someone we love. And I do think that that's interesting, but I didn't have to go to any writers and say, oh, you actually proved that climate change isn't real. So, like,
Yeah.
did that crop up for you at all, John, with Crime Inc. icon?
Not really. I mean, it's sort of like we were less, how to put so a little bit of the background. Crime Inc. It started because the organization that I co-founded with Kristen Limpionka did a study. Jeff Marks did a great study, did all the heavy lifting work to find out that in 2023. Um, Out of 500 some stories, less than 1% had queer representation in them. And we just did this as a study. Like this was not, we didn't plan an anthology or anything like that. And then Salem from Bywater reached out to me and said, "Hey, John, I saw your study and my jaw dropped. I'm like, can we do something to change this? And like, why don't we do an anthology of queer crime fiction?" And so that's what we did. And, it wasn't like someone, it was not an open submission. It was an invitation only anthology. So I mean, maybe those questions might come up if we're like, well, this is a great story, but it's not necessarily a queer crime writer. Um, And I mean, there's a lot of queer stories being written by straight people these days, and they're even, can be quite good. It's not that. It's just that, part of our mission was to sort of highlight and show queer crime fiction being written by queer people, by queer
Right.
writers. And so we did that. The one thing that has come up for me is that some people have said, well, John, this is great and everything, but is it a little bit like, have yield diversity panel where they stick all the people who are, in some cases marginalized by society, and so that they'll kind of be quiet and just have their panel and go
Mm.
away. So you're doing that with queer, this story. You're basically saying, here's your, and I think that's, I take that point and I say, look, we need this anthology so folks can find these writers so that
It's proof of concept, right?
yeah.
It's, hey, look at these amazing writers. They can write in this format, and you should include them in your anthology
Right. And
as
here's a
well.
great resource for you. I mean, if nothing else,
Absolutely.
there's, a lot of great anthology editors, they're looking for great stories. They can go out and find these writers and say, I want to, be more inclusive with what I'm doing.
Right.
Here's a resource for them. And believe me, there's a lot more. I mean, my hope, my, knock on wood hope is to be able to do another one of these because there's so many people that couldn't include or some people that I asked that couldn't do it, for,
Right.
various other reasons. So I think that, the idea is just to sort of highlight, shine a light on with main goal being inclusion ultimately, that one day you don't need an anthology just for queer crime writers because we're just fully represented, proportionally represented in the anthologies, but less than 1% out of 500 some stories is not proportional by any means.
Right.
But and
That
so
means some filter's going wrong somewhere.
yeah, something's going wrong, and I think it's complex. I think it's really complex. I think it's not always about playing. I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding or confusion. I think there is some editors that aren't particularly interested in diversity issues. I think some try, but they can't quite get you know, diverse writers, queer writers into their anthologies. I think it's complex because for a writer, a queer writer, you have to feel if you're being edited by a straight writer that they're going to edit you with care and
Mm.
understanding. And with a long history of that not occurring, a long, 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 long history of being edited by straight people, and I think, and not in a positive way. So there's a lot of history as a reason why you feel that way. At the same time, I think there are a lot of people out there doing good things, and we don't want to, assume like we don't want anyone to assume anything about us that that's going to be the case. So it's just complex. Just it is. But I think having the anthology is certainly better than not having it.
Absolutely. And it's fantastic. Like, definitely anyone who's listening that hasn't picked it up, you definitely need to. There, it is just cover to cover, fantastic.
Well, likewise. I mean, I think we're all doing kind of interesting. I think it's an interesting kind of way of tackling an anthology. I'm not saying it's the only way or it's the only
Right.
good way or something like that. I just think it's a very interesting way of tackling an anthology that we've all done, sort of with this, kind of purpose driven, I guess, versus theme driven.
Right.
Yeah. And I just really loved every time a story came over the transom, I felt rich, like gold fever rich. Like I have this story and
All
it's
right.
really good and nobody else has it yet.
All right.
And then I could share it with the world and that was fun too. But
Yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the delights of being an editor, I think. God, I gotta tell you, honestly get tired of, saying, "Hey, buy my book." And with the anthology, I felt like I was saying, "Hey, look at all my friends
yes.
and these amazing queer writers' stories. Like, look, it's just so much more fun to promote other people than yourself, I gotta say."
I would agree. I've had the same experience. It's just so much more fun to say, look at this story. Look how fantastic it is.
Yeah.
Look at these authors that, put their heart and soul into these stories. Like, yeah, it's great. Did either of you, when you were getting stories, come across like a B-side social issue that wasn't like
Oh,
your
interesting.
main topic of your anthology that really perked you up or interested you or surprised you?
Hmm.
So
That's that's a great question. We'd have to think
I
about
ha
it.
I have I have two short answers. In the first anthology, Katrina McPherson wrote this great, I'll just call it a Me Too story for brevity. Um, and it honestly had never occurred to me that, oh yeah, this sort of control and abuse is a form of silencing people's voices,
Hmm,
and it is strongly connected to voting. And then the other one was I had never given a minute's thought to how developmentally disabled people can vote, and someone wrote a newer writer wrote a story about that. I'm like, oh yeah,
that's
that's a
great.
thing.
Yeah,
I mean, I think certainly. I mean, some things I guess I did anticipate that, while we're writing stories about, in some cases, you know, queer people being struggling in a straight world or being, it's discriminated against. I mean, there the sort of overlap with racism, of course, comes to play, or misogyny came into
sure.
play a lot.
Mhm.
They're not easily divisible. They really do overlap a lot. And so the stories certainly, discuss those issues often as well. I don't know if I would call it a B side, but it's more like or surprising. Didn't surprise
Yeah,
me.
yeah, sure.
But it was something that I think does come up at the same time a lot in these stories. It's not just one form of discrimination that's being dealt with, but a series of and types of discrimination layered that
Yeah.
characters are having to deal with.
What about you, Curtis? Did you find a
Yeah,
B-side?
curious. Yeah.
I did. I think because our anthology is really exploring how the causes of climate change uh, affect everyday people on a greater scale than the rich, I think all these ills of society come into play, right? You have, you know, these people that are already up against, they're in between a rock and a hard place, and then they have their town get flooded out, or they have, a heat wave, and they don't have air conditioning. So it's these things. One story that I was really C.W. Blackwell's story, Poison in the Wind, is the main character is a firefighter who's an inmate. And this was a big deal during the LA fires, and kind of learning about how that operation works and how they use inmates. So that was really cool to see included, but he also didn't stop there. He took on AI and tech bros too. So it was there was a lot of good skewering in that story. So, yeah, for sure. A lot of the stories touched on multiple issues in society.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you're tackling. I mean, I bet it's true for a lot of crime fiction in
Yeah, I think
general.
so.
You're always going to be looking at uh, characters who have, I mean, just from the pure like creating compelling storytelling, you want characters to have lots of obstacles because it makes for interesting storytelling. Well, what can be interesting, but also, really rich and compelling is when it's, social issues, whether it's socioeconomic um, or issues having to do with identity or the environment, or they're all going to intersect,
Right.
and the
Absolutely.
stakes are getting higher and the obstacles are going to get greater. So, you know, um,
And those pressures can really influence a character more strongly than
yeah.
a character that's not going through those issues already, right? And you feel like you're being forced in one direction, or you're forcing yourself in one direction because of these pressures. So yeah, I agree. I think we see that a lot in crime in general, with good reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have some questions that we're going to ask each other about our specific anthologies, but we had a couple craft questions I thought would be fun to kind of talk through. One of them, because I kind of geeked out on this myself, was did either of you have a formula or an intention of how you stacked your stories, how you built your table of contents? Misty, you want to start?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I panicked over that, all three volumes. I didn't know what to do. And I read other people's anthologies and I saw that people did different things. So I decided to put this um, some stories that were really strong at the beginning, in the middle, and the end to try to pull people through. And I tried to make things um, mixed, so I didn't have two super serious stories in a row or two lighter
Right.
stories in a row. But some of it was just, I don't know, which is very embarrassing to admit in public.
Well, I mean, you had a wealth of authors too. Some of the authors that you have in those volumes are just heavyweights. And so,
Oh, yeah.
like,
Travis Richardson could make a stone cry, and Face Noted, she's amazing. So,
Travis is
yeah, I
great.
was lucky.
Yeah.
How about you guys?
Yeah, I think that we have a lot of stories in Crime Week Iconic. I mean, you can't necessarily design for it. The concept of the anthology was that every story would in some way engage with a queer icon. The icon themselves didn't have to be queer, like Dolly Parton, but they were, a story had to somehow engage with the icon. In some cases, the icon's actually a character. In many cases, they're just a reference. Um, so, you got all these very different stories, from crime procedurals to noir to historical. We have lighter stories. We have just absolutely devastatingly dark stories. Um, and so what I started doing is I read them, I went through and I made a sort of essentially a 50 word or so summary of each story. And
Wow.
I tried to think about how pairings.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so, I knew a couple things. I wanted to begin the anthology with a gut punch because I'm frankly really angry right now. And I feel like I wanted a wake up call, like a one that was just like bam, And so thank you, Krista,
You
for
nailed
giving us
it. She
that.
gave you that.
She gave us that.
Yeah.
And so, and then it was a little more like riffing a little bit, like looking for stories that had resonances. And two stories are sort of focused on misogyny, or there are two stories that are really centered around dates that go wrong. And there's also the final story makes a lot of reference to Jane Lawless, Ellen Hart, of Grandmaster fame of MWA, famous lesbian crime writer, did our introduction. So we got sort of the alpha and the omega. So there's some things that sort of presented themselves just as nice, unifying qualities. But it's not like it's a journey that like with hills and rises, and after a couple of dark stories like Misty, you have to put something lighter just to kind of like give the reader a bit of a breather.
Sure.
But yeah, so it's interesting. It's actually really fun. It's really
It
fun.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you do it, Curtis?
Yeah, what was your methodology, or do
Yeah,
you
I
have
had
one?
I had a lot of fun with mine. So we have 15 stories, and so it ended up being, let's see if I can do math right, eight. male writers and 6 women writers. And so I didn't want to be like male story, women's story. So that was one thing I wanted to vary. But the main driver was the types of climate change, right? So as you would expect, we have probably the most wildfires, uh,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to just like burn people out. Sorry.
Oh, huh.
So just varying those up, wildfire, flood, heat wave, like that.
Yeah.
And then once I got those laid out, I really kind of looked for the rhythm of the stories. Since we only had 15, I kind of saw it as like putting together like a music album and just like doing the types of things you were saying, John, like and Misty, like not having too many dark stories, providing a little levity. I did that with the last 2 stories. Megan Lucas is our last story, and it's this sweeping 10,000 word, 3 protagonist story, and it's devastating and heartbreaking. So I knew I had to like uh protect the reader. And I put Richie Navarrese's story before it because it has some levity to it and it's really creative in its structure and its story telling. So there were things like that that I took into account. And then I even, after I got the table of contents laid out, I was like, all right, uplifting story, kind of a bummer, uh, hopeful, kind of,
Yeah.
and looked at it that way too. So I think that was one of my most fun things putting together the anthology was stacking the stories.
But that's where you get to be creative. Like,
Yeah.
with that and the editorial feedback, I think there's often a creative element in that, but certainly arranging and thinking about that um, is part of the purely editorial creativity element of what we do.
So I've got one last question before we get to individual questions where we'll all be asking questions. So just for anyone out there who's thinking about editing an anthology that explores an issue in society, something that we would classify as crime fiction that matters, what's a piece of advice you would give them?
Um, I think make sure that you don't bite off more than you can chew.
What
Um,
do you mean by that?
I mean that if it's an open submission, that's very different
Mm,
than, where you're inviting people who at least they're writing, into an anthology. It's so much more work. And, I think it's really great to have, and I think open calls are great and everything, but it is a different beast. Um, and so I think the other part of it is that, um, you got to promote these things. And
mhm.
I spent probably 60% of my energy promoting and 40% editing.
Yes.
And I think that's just being aware of that, and you feel a kind of pressure. I do. It's not pressure being applied from outside force, but because I really care about this collection. I really care about these writers. I
Mhm.
want to get out there and I want to support and promote them. And it's been in a lot of cases very fun. But this is my last event in 2025, and I'm celebrating that fact. So
What about you, Misty? You have 3 anthologies, so you have 3 times the experience that John and I
yeah,
have. What would you
indeed.
what would be your piece of advice you would give someone?
Um, be be realistic about what you can afford to do.
Mm.
I am a technical software technical writer for my day job, so I have this rich uncle software who makes certain things easy for me. So I uh, was able to pay for a decent cover and a good copy editor and things like that. So and many people aren't in that position. It doesn't mean you can't publish a great anthology. It just means
Sure.
plan ahead, know that your plans are going to go wrong,
Yeah.
and especially anything to do with software. Um, and and one cool thing that's sort of a compromise between open call and invitation. Oh, also, don't be afraid to ask people to invite people to submit. My first one, I was terrified to ask anyone. So all the people I asked were people I was sure wouldn't yell at me if they wanted to say no.
I
And that was
swear, people
very
are yelling at you for asking you to submit. That tells me everything.
Yeah,
Then
right.
it's best that they're not submitting.
that was the last of my vestigial shyness, I think. But
A polite decline is totally fine, but yelling
Yeah.
at, how dare you ask me?
But Katrina McPherson introduced me to this great idea of you invite someone and ask them to invite a new writer that they
Oh,
know.
Interesting.
Um, and that way you can get fresh voices. So fresh voices and experienced voices. I was so surprised by some of the brand new writers in the third anthology. They just did things I would never have thought of.
I like that a lot. That's a great method.
It was great. We were very fortunate that we had quite a few emerging and fresh voices submit, and we included several. So we were very blessed in that regard. I would say for me, my one piece of advice would be make sure you have a passion for the subject that you're going to theme your anthology after, because
Yeah.
this is a months long thing, right? And
Yeah, it's a big
also
commitment.
to your point, John, like you're going to be promoting this heavily, or you should be, to give those writers their proper due. And so make sure it's a topic that you're passionate about and that you can speak to fairly, authoritatively about.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I mean, that's true for anything. Like, I think you got to have a passion that fuels this because it's a lot of work um, and a lot of it, people don't see the work that goes on. So you have to care about it, the
Right.
object itself, the writing and the point of it.
Okay, so we have some questions for each other. Do either of you want to take the lead while I let my I'll let you take the lead?
Is this for, just clarity, is this for the wider group, or are you asking just us?
Oh, no, just individual questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious about how you talked. I want to know a little bit about, because this is kind of coming from my own experience. Like I'm mostly a novel writer, and
Mhm.
back in my MFA program, I wrote a lot of short fiction, and I love reading short fiction of all sorts, crime and otherwise. But I did feel a little daunted because I don't feel like an expert in short fiction. How you felt editing short fiction, both of you felt doing that. Did you feel expert enough? Did you feel like there's a learning curve? Did you feel like you were worried about it, but ultimately it was fine? I'm just curious.
I think for me, I was very fortunate that I had a great team of editors at Rock and a Hard Place. So I was not on my own in reading submissions and actually didn't even do a bulk of the editing work. We had two or three editors who took those stories on and then passed them to me for final review. Um, but no, I was pretty confident evaluating the short stories, and I think, you know, having a very uh, a very specific theme and knowing what we wanted to do with that theme really helped, because as the story would come in, I mean, we received, I think, like 60 or 70 stories, and we only included 15, but there were so many great stories, but some may not have fit that theme exactly as we were seeing it, and so that made it easier going through the submissions to identify, oh, this person got it, they nailed it, and this person, excellent story, but didn't quite hit what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
I did feel a little scared from time to time. It's like who died and told me I could publish a book?
Right.
but about 80% of the tasks outside of evaluating the content are the same as tech writing. So I was
Yeah.
fine there. Um, and then I just got so many good stories that gave me a lot of confidence. And I knew the edits could be pretty light, that the voices were strong, and there weren't, there's sometimes stuff goes really wrong in a novel that just never goes wrong in a short story. So
Mm.
I sucked it up.
I see
Michelle, are
where,
we getting
I'm
close to
gonna,
time or something?
yes, I'm gonna break in just because we've got about 7 minutes left and we do have a couple of
Yeah.
audience questions. So I thought we
sure.
would take a moment to take a look at those. So our
Sure.
first question is from, hold on, sorry, one second, is from Ed Ridgely. And I actually had a similar question. He asks, what is your favorite crime fiction short story that matters and why? My question was the same thing, but for novels. So, what's your
Hmm.
favorite crime fiction novel that changed how you thought about something and why?
And that's a great question.
Let's start with John.
So, I have a lot. It's so hard to be like your favorite, but I was just gonna say the first one that comes to my mind. Lori Lynn Drummond's Something About a Scar. I believe it's a collection that won the Edgar. I teach it with my introduction to film class. It's a crime procedural, but it's a really complex sort of moral study of like kind of with the intersection of personal responsibility and personal life and policing. And
Hmm.
I think it's the main character is a social worker and she's taking care of a woman who's been stabbed, survivor who's been stabbed um, and pretty horribly, but survived this incident. And the cop who is attending to it doesn't believe her. He thinks that she's made it up, that she's kind of done it to herself. And time passes and the woman doesn't really get any sort of the cops basically just shrug it off. Time passes and the social worker ends up becoming a cop and then ends up marrying the detective who didn't believe the woman, and then the woman comes back, and so it's just sort of all these sort of levels of complexity at play. It's a beautiful story. Highly recommend it. There are a lot that are great, but it just feels like you're really capturing all the moral complexities of this thing, called policing, in one story.
How about you, Misty?
I guess for a short story, lately, Face Noden wrote the story One Bullet, One Vote, and it was also published in the Best of collection. And her voice in that and the journey she takes us on is just, it's like nothing else. So I love that.
How long?
And Red
Awesome.
Harvest is my favorite novel
Oh,
because
Oh yeah,
that's
I didn't even think about mentioning my novel.
yeah, I'll go with novel. So I'll say Everybody Knows by Jordan Harper came out a couple years ago and just really just shows Hollywood and that scene for what it is. And it's just I mean it'll it peel the skin off back off your face like so searing, like it's incredible.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so the next question here is from Derek, and he is asking if you have any suggestions for keeping track of calls for submissions to anthologies, and any feedback, any question, or any suggestions for getting feedback from other queer writers. Apparently, circles have been hard for them to find.
Hmm. Well, John has a great group that Derek could join then.
Yeah, it's, queer crime writers. That her point is to have a community which is a mixture of both aspiring and published queer crime writers. Now, we don't necessarily at this point offer a critique group, but there's no reason why. It's a great place to find potential critique group members that you could form and create on your own. And we're still evolving as a sort of community and what we can do, what we can offer. But I think that certainly that. Yeah, I mean, I think generally, like you got to find your people that you feel safe, so you can kind of throw your rough drafts out and
Yeah.
you get the feedback that you know is going to sort of be supportive and want it to be the best thing it can be before you venture out beyond.
As far as submission calls, the uh, short mystery fiction society, if you join them, they put out a regular, like I think once a month, uh, blog that lists every open call. And you can also find it just searching like places like Submission Grinder and those type of places.
Yeah, in fact, we try to throw submissions out there too. In fact, I see Michael here. Michael will send me several over that I will then share with the group. So, and I always try to know, like if I know the, people who are doing it, I can say, look, they really do mean that they want, there is sometimes a timidity or a fear, of being edited by someone that's not queer, but you've got to stick your neck out there and try it. And
Yeah.
so you gotta do it to see what happens. But I think, it's certainly helpful to be like, hey, he's a good guy. He'll be okay.
Misty, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh no, I'm not very organized, but like I get newsletters from the writers I love, and if they publish uh, a short story, I'll go look at that publisher and see if anything's coming up. But it's a very disorganized, loopy sort of process.
Okay, I don't know how tight you guys are on time because we are actually at the hour now, but we have two more really good questions that if you have time, I would love to be able to ask.
Yeah,
So,
we can.
okay, so I'm actually going to skip Lori, no offense to you, but I'm going to skip over to Michael Brackens just for a second because I feel like it's almost the opposite of the question that we just answered, which is how can editors ensure that they get submissions from a diverse set of writers? How do you guys go about ensuring that?
Well, I think John probably has the best answer for that. But I'll just pop in and say, like, when I was looking for stories for this anthology, I just made it explicitly clear in the submission guidelines that we want we want submissions from a broad range of writers and with diverse backgrounds. And I think just putting that intention out there is important and speaking to that because, like John said, there's a lot of writers can be timid or unsure, and you want to be a welcoming place.
I think, yes, absolutely making it loud and clear that you're interested in, um, I think particularly the language you use is important too, like naming what those diverse writers are, avoiding language that's like, we want all writers, of any, it's like, no, you got to say a little more specifically that we want these traditionally marginalized writers are, the language has to be a little more specific. Um, and but otherwise, folks, there's a kind of like, catch all. We like all writers kind of language that can be, it's a little bit coded for really we're not all that interested. We're just, don't want to
Covering
get
our
yelled at.
bases. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think that even if you don't mean it, and a lot of times people don't mean it, they really do mean, I really want all kinds of writers. They mean what they say, but there's a code that has been used over the years to say that, and it is a way of avoiding actually saying specifically, we want, writers from different list of marginalized backgrounds, I think that the other thing is just to partner with groups like queer crime writers, I think that's a great way, which I know Michael does because he sent me stuff, but this is for anyone else. Like, that like if we know you and then we say, hey, send your stories here, you're more likely to get those stories because you've been sort of vetted and and I think that can be, a way of, ensuring more diversity as well, and also reaching out to writers and say, hey, we want you.
Yeah.
Another way.
Yeah, I would definitely send a note to John and to Crime Writers of Color Uh, an interesting thing happened for number three. I got listed in a list of submissions in some group that was focused on science fiction,
Hmm.
and I got really interesting stories. They were crime speculative blends, some of
Hmm.
them, but and that was where some of my diverse writers came from. So I think other communities, other writing genres may not be as siloed as we can be here.
That's
So
so true, Misty, and it's something actually I see as a teacher a lot. I teach crime fiction because I really want young people to write in it more, uh, because it is. I think other genres have been a little more flexible. I don't really know if I fully understand why. Um,
Flexible in what way? In like genre blending?
I think maybe it's the nature of the storytelling. And I don't know. I think this if people have in their heads that crime fiction is very conservative.
Hmm. Which
And
for many years it has been,
it
right?
was.
People who
There's a
do.
reason for that. It's just
Yeah.
there's so many great examples now that that's of course,
Right.
and that's why like we in my my intro to crime fiction class, we read Sean Cosby and Margot Dwighy and Gillian Flynn. I mean, there's you know, which I think just trying to get them aware that there's a lot going on. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's often true. That you know,
and if I can say one more thing, the science fiction writing communities had giant public Donnybrooks over these issues with their sort of controlling organizations. And RWA did too, to the extent that RWA imploded because
Yeah.
they could not adapt to all of the diverse voices that were wanting to be in that community.
Hmm.
So we might have a fight on our hands in the future. Who knows?
yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
I'm a fighter.
Yeah, well, me too.
All right, and I saved the best for last. So Lori asks, how do we reach people that don't already think like us? And she uses a really fun analogy of how do we sneak some cheese sauce on the broccoli to make them think that they're eating a Big Mac? So any thoughts on that?
That's a great question, and it is one that we had on our list to discuss, so we should discuss it here now. I don't know, to be honest. Something like On Fire and Underwater that's talking about the consequences of climate change. I don't know if a climate change denier is going to read this book, first of all. Can they read? I don't know. Second, second, is it going to change their mind? Like, probably not. So then, does that mean that we're basically preaching to the choir? Perhaps, but there's value in that. There's value in, like we said earlier, pointing to an issue in society that's harming people or, is something we want to correct and naming it and saying, this is it. And for us, that was our whole mission. We wanted to say our piece. We wanted to leave something for future generations so that when they look back from the smoldering earth that we're going to leave them, that they'll see that there were some of us who didn't have our heads in the sand and that we stood up and we said our piece and we called it for what it was.
I think that, I mean, this is sort of along the lines of what Curtis said. I don't think you're going to change people who are absolutely, you know, uh, enamored with their point of view. It's just it's pointless. It's pointless to use your energy that way. I think there's some pe teaching the choir, but I also think there's people that aren't fully like decided. I guess I don't believe that everyone is like we're on these
Totally.
all. I think we do. I think that we have mechanisms like social media, which are and media in general, which are insanely polarizing, and it's become a huge issue. It may be the real issue under all the other issues, because we're so polarized. But the truth is, I don't know if we are in our everyday life. I think we are in this, sort of social media space. But, I've had lots of conversations with people who I don't necessarily identify with politically, and we agree on a lot. And like, well, maybe we can reach people. But we do have to do it through storytelling versus we have to tell the better story versus screaming at them and telling them that they're wrong. And so that's why I think storytelling is so powerful. It's like it's the way in.
Mhm.
And I think the more we do it, and I think there's some great examples that have done this already, and I think we continue to do it, just work at it, figure. So that's why I'm always telling my students is to keep on telling your stories, and I keep my friends as well, because we all get kind of down in the dumps sometimes, and you're like, no, keep at it, because I think eventually you're going to hit the right moment, the right person, or even collect a few more. I do think that matters. So as much as I do think there's value in preaching to the choir, I don't think that's the only thing we're doing.
Yeah.
And can I break a moderator rule and throw in a thought here? I recently read a Terry Shames book, The Troubling Death of Maddie Benson, I believe. I know it's Maddie Benson is the right part. She deals with the issue of abortion rights in there, and she does this really interesting job of presenting both sides of the argument in a way that I really felt fostered thinking about things in a new way, no matter which side you were on.
Yeah.
And I really admired how she did that. So I just wanted to chime that in. And then, sorry, let Misty speak.
I'm not sure I have the answer to that question. I come from I have family members who think very differently than me about a lot of things. And I've often thought about how I could write subversive characters that would sneak up on them. So for now, I just put all kinds of different people in my stories, and I'll figure out the great answer to that question later.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for this. This has been a really wonderful discussion, the kind of thing that I think we need to have more of, especially as you were saying, Misty, when other organizations have waited until too long to start addressing the issues of, how to approach all of these different kinds of things. So thank you so much for taking your time, for suggesting this in the first place, and taking your time and coming and doing this through MWA. We really appreciate it. And with that, I will turn it back over to Daisy so she can say the final MWA-ish things.
Michelle.
Ish.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, everyone, and thanks so much for folks who've been here for this talk, and yes, it's particularly to our wonderful presenters, and especially to John and others who are in the middle of the night now on the East Coast, indulging us Californians in our weird time zone. But
Those
I
are
know
his
that was a one.
pajamas. You got pajamas on, right, John?
Oh, I can either confirm or deny.
That was a wonderful talk. It will be up on our YouTube page if I ever figure out how to do that. But yeah, and if you're not a member of MWA, please consider joining. And
That's
thanks.
where all the cool kids are.
Well, thanks for
Apparently.
hosting this. We really appreciate it. And thanks for
Yes, thank you so
everyone
much for
tuning in.
hosting.
Yeah, thank you, Daisy and Michelle, so much.
Yes. Clap and good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Good night. Take care.
Good night.
Bye.
Happy holidays.